Do you have a moment? It's about your mother-in-law. The doctor, who had pulled on my arm, looked at me with a deeply concerned expression. It's been 10 years since my mother-in-law became wheelchair-bound, and she has regularly been going to the hospital for checkups and physical therapy. That day, my mother-in-law's at the hospital for the same reason, undergoing tests. I was waiting for my mother-in-law in the waiting room before her therapy session when this doctor grabbed my arm. I'm gonna speak with her primary doctor about this. I gently released my arm from the doctor's grip. The doctor standing in front of me was a man, but my mother-in-law's primary was a woman. I didn't heard of any change in her primary care doctor. I was puzzled as to why a doctor who wasn't her primary would want to talk about my mother-in-law. Seeing the suspicion in my eyes, the male doctor hastily grabbed my hands. There's something neither your mother-in-law nor her primary doctor should hear. That's why I only want to tell you. Huh? Only me? I took a step towards the doctor, who was looking at me with a grave expression. My name is Julie. I'm a 37-year-old office worker. I work at a small and medium-sized company, but for some reason I've been working remotely lately. When I was a child, my mother left home, and I was raised in a single-parent family. My father was always like, your mother was a no-good woman who ran off with a younger man. He advised me to never meet her. All I heard was that her name was Yvonne and she was a spendthrift, treating me like a nuisance and my father like a slave. My parents eventually divorced, and thanks to my father working day and night, I was able to go to college and find a job, albeit not at a big firm. Even though I didn't have a mother, I never felt lonely because of all the love my father gave me. After starting work, I've lived alone and become independent. 14 years ago, I married Mike. Mike's father had passed away 2 years before our wedding, and his mother, who was living alone, warmly welcomed me into their family, treating me like her own daughter. For years into our marriage, my mother-in-law was involved in a car accident and became wheelchair-bound. My mother-in-law used to be a lively and cheerful woman, but since the accident, her smiles have disappeared, and she's become very withdrawn. It must be hard for her to accept limited mobility. Though she had various caregivers over the years, it seemed none of them were a good match, and she seemed to deteriorate. She kept contacting us, saying she felt lonely and wanted us to come back, even if it was for a short while. Concerned, we decided to move back into his family home to take care of her. We decided to take a week off using our paid time off to dedicate to her care, and then return to our jobs once she was feeling better. My mother-in-law seemed relieved when my husband and I came to visit. After a few days, she began to smile again. But when we told her that we needed to get back to work, her demeanor changed completely. She didn't let us go. She was like, "No. Please, both of you, don't leave. Don't leave me alone," crying out, nearly hysterical. Trying to calm her, I was like, "Look. Mike really needs to get back to his job, but I'll talk to my company and see if I can stay here a bit longer. I'll come back as often as I can. Just hang in there for me. Julie, if you can stay, that'd be great. Mike, you better come back, okay? I'll be waiting." After the loss of her husband, my mother-in-law had been alone for a long time. When we, as a couple, came to visit, she was overjoyed. But our sudden notification of leaving her likely brought on feelings of anxiety and confusion. I guessed her weakened state over the past week made her more fearful of facing her loneliness. After discussing with my company, I decided to switch to remote work and work for a short time from home until my mother-in-law calmed down while taking care of her. But ever since then, she despised being alone. Even when I worked from home, she'd always be clinging to me. No matter how close we might be, I couldn't let her be seen by my coworkers. Even if I asked her to leave the room, she'd always be waiting somewhere she could see me. It felt like I was being watched, and I began to resent it. Mike, on the other hand, would come home on weekends and even take some days off during the week to help with her care. Although she continued physical therapy, there was no improvement in her condition, which meant I couldn't return to the office. Our personal lives were dominated by her care, leaving no time for just the two of us. This year marks the 10th year of this lifestyle. She turned 65. With each passing year, her dependency on us grew. My husband, unable to bear it, reduced his visits year by year. Even if I stepped out for just a few minutes, my mother-in-law would freak out, yelling, and she was like, "Take me with you." Calming her down took ages, and I couldn't go back to our own home. But I couldn't abandon the woman who had welcomed me, from a single-parent household, without any judgment or prejudice. Then, one day, everything changed. On this day, my mother-in-law had a routine checkup. As always, I accompanied her to the hospital. My mother-in-law's doctor was a woman in her 30s named Mia. She had been taking care of my mother-in-law for 10 years, and I trusted her completely. After my mother-in-law went into the examination room, I stepped outside to take a work call. When I returned about 15 minutes later, a young male doctor stopped me. "Excuse me, you're Sally's daughter, right?" Sally is my mother-in-law's first name. The doctor who called out using my mother-in-law's name was a male doctor a bit younger than me. It was Ryan, and he recently transferred to this hospital. He mentioned that he's worked in the same department as Dr. Mia, who has been in charge of my mother-in-law. Taken aback, I was like, "Yes, actually I'm her daughter-in-law." "But what's going on?" "Well, I'm sorry for the sudden approach. Do you have a moment? I need to discuss something about your mother-in-law." "Regarding my mother-in-law?" "Sure, what's up?" I figured my mother-in-law's appointment probably wasn't over yet, so I agreed. Then, Dr. Ryan looked a bit relieved and led me to a small private room. It was a consultation room, not too far from the examination rooms. Dr. Ryan motioned for me to sit in a chair on the side, and once I settled in, he took a seat across a small desk, looking directly into my eyes. "You're currently living with Sally at her house to take care of her, right?" Oh, yes, that's right." I explained that for the past 10 years, I'd been working from my mother-in-law's home while caring for her. I hardly had time to hang out with friends, let alone have some alone time with my husband. Because of my mother-in-law's increased dependency, my husband started avoiding coming home. I lost almost all of my personal time, so I couldn't really discuss the care of my mother-in-law with anyone else. Dr. Ryan nodded, listening intently, which made me spill all the frustrations I'd been feeling. "Oh, I'm so sorry for going on and on like this." He was like, "It's completely all right. Anyway, wow, 10 years. He said that with a gentle smile, and then his face grew thoughtful. Moments later, Dr. Ryan looked at me with a serious expression. He started talking. However, what reached my ears wasn't Dr. Ryan's words, but a scream from my mother-in-law. In a panic, both Dr. Ryan and I rushed to the examination room where my mother-in-law was, and what we saw was unthinkable. I was at a loss for words. Dr. Ryan shook his head and he was like, "You should leave that house ASAP. Get away from your mother-in-law." His words left me speechless. Suppressing the anger that welled up inside me, I nodded to Dr. Ryan. I didn't go to my mother-in-law but headed straight to the police. Though skeptical they'd listen, they promised to send someone to investigate, so I hurriedly packed up my things from the house. The image of what I'd seen at the hospital kept replaying in my mind. An hour or so later, as I was still packing, I called my husband to explain everything. Throughout, I kept receiving countless calls and messages from my mother-in-law. She must have been worried since I didn't show up even after her treatments. But I continued to ignore her non-stop calls and messages until I mostly finished packing. In the evening, my husband and the police arrived, and that's when I finally answered a call from my mother-in-law.
"Julie, where are you? I've called so many times. Why aren't you picking up?"
As soon as the call connected, my mother-in-law yelled with fury. Normally, I'd apologize immediately, but this time with a firm attitude, I was like, "I'm at home.
"Why did you leave me behind and go home first? How could you do that?"
My mother-in-law continued to rant and rave. Sighing, I was like, "Hey, I realized I don't need to live with you anymore, so I'm going back to the house where my husband is." I told my mother-in-law firmly.
Well, Julie, what on earth are you thinking? How do you expect me to live without you? How am I supposed to get back from the hospital?
You probably know best, right? Why don't you just walk back home? After all, your legs are fine. So, you don't need a wheelchair or care, right? When I continued like that, my mother-in-law let out a short scream. I could picture her being extremely upset.
You know I found out everything you've been hiding.
I then relayed to my mother-in-law what Dr. Ryan had told me and what I had personally witnessed. According to Dr. Ryan, recent tests showed that there were no issues with the muscles or nerves in my mother-in-law's body. That's when he thought it might be all in her head. He thought that maybe my mother-in-law genuinely believed she couldn't walk, and that belief was what was actually preventing her from walking. Apparently, the power of such beliefs can be incredibly strong, and he was considering not only physical therapy for her legs but also psychological care. That's why he thought to include me, as family, in the care plan and had called me over. But, it turned out, even that wasn't necessary. While I was speaking with Dr. Ryan, I heard a woman's scream from the examination room.
Was that my mother-in-law?
Dr. Ryan and I exchanged glances and quickly went to check the room. The exam room door had a window, and through it, we saw my mother-in-law making gestures as if swatting away an insect. Indeed, the scream had been my mother-in-law's. But why would there be a bug in the exam room? As it turned out, my mother-in-law had mistaken dust for a bug. We saw her picking up the motionless dust and walking over to the trash can to throw it away. Incredibly, my mother-in-law walked without the need for a wheelchair or cane, moving with light steps. I stared in shock as Dr. Ryan pushed me to the corner of the hallway. Peeking into the examination room, we noticed that my mother-in-law didn't seem to be aware of us. She calmly returned to her wheelchair as if nothing had happened. Just then, Dr. Mia came back into the room and slowly extended her hand to my mother-in-law. My mother-in-law, seemingly in response, placed a brown envelope in her hand. Dr. Mia discreetly slipped the envelope into her skirt pocket and, acting as if nothing unusual had transpired, pushed my mother-in-law's wheelchair towards the facility for physical therapy.
Julie, are you okay?
I was so stunned by the series of events that I could only stand frozen until Dr. Ryan spoke softly to me. It wasn't that she couldn't walk or even that she believed she couldn't. She was pretending to be immobile. Trembling, I felt Dr. Ryan's hand on my shoulder, shaking his head gently. He advised me to leave my in-laws' house immediately, and I quickly packed to escape from my mother-in-law. Throughout my story, my mother-in-law remained silent. Finally, with a sigh audible over the phone, she began to speak, perhaps realizing she couldn't evade the truth any longer. It's true that I became wheelchair-bound after a car accident. And it's true I was injured seriously enough to need care. But thanks to the treatments, about 5 years after the accident, I could walk with the aid of a cane. My husband and I, listening over the speaker, were stunned. To think she had recovered in just 5 years. What then was the purpose of the 12 years we had spent caring for her? She was like I feared that once you both found out I could walk, you'd leave my side, Julie, Mike. I couldn't bear that thought. We knew she loved us dearly from her day-to-day attitude. She had us take care of her to ensure we wouldn't leave. Julie, I truly love you like my own daughter. After Mike moved out and my husband passed away, I felt so lonely. My mother-in-law repeatedly told us, but our hearts remained unmoved. We knew that, Mom. Mike. But the way you went about it was wrong. We can't be by your side any longer. Sorry.
Look, I've been taking care of you for the past 10 years while working. My colleagues have experienced promotions, marriages, and childbirth. Because of your care, I couldn't have a child of my own. I had almost given up on having kids. But now, I feel like the past 10 years are in vain. Why did you deceive us to the point of having us care for you? We would have visited you during our time off. Why did it have to be this way?
I didn't mean to blame her, but as the words poured out, so did my tears. With my husband supporting me, I told my mother-in-law that I didn't intend to care for her anymore. We would leave her house today and never contact her again. My mother-in-law protested and grew hysterical, but we hung up. The police, after understanding the details, said they'd begin an investigation. 2 months later. After moving, I was at a hospital with my husband. When we were about to leave after finishing our doctor's appointment, a familiar person rushed over to us. It was Dr. Mia, who was supposed to be my mother-in-law's doctor. We remembered her with fuller cheeks, but she looked gaunt, and fatigue emanated from her entire being. Wondering why she was at this hospital, we couldn't decline her as she approached with a desperate look, so we reluctantly listened to what she had to say. Turns out, Dr. Mia knew all along that my mother-in-law's leg was healed, and she had accepted money from her to give her a disability diagnosis. She mentioned the money was also in the envelope she received from my mother-in-law that day. Apparently, due to a complaint by Dr. Ryan recently, the hospital found out, and she was fired immediately. Furthermore, since she had continuously forged medical certificates, she's likely going to be arrested for fabricating medical records, and it's almost certain that her medical license will be revoked. But she insisted that she didn't do anything wrong. Incredibly, Dr. Mia claimed that the money wasn't an appreciation gift from my mother-in-law, but hush money from my husband and me. She alleged we plotted to scam disability pension by making my mother-in-law disabled, and she had written the necessary documents reluctantly after we threatened her and paid her off, but there was no evidence of any of this. It was Dr. Mia who extended her hand to my mother-in-law that day. I couldn't believe that she put all the blame on us just because she was in trouble, about to be arrested.
What are you talking about? We haven't done anything like that. No. That's the truth. I'm gonna tell the police everything.
Dr. Mia, her eyes red with rage, shouted, making us turn pale. While her claims had no evidence, it would also be tough for us to prove we had nothing to do with her. Terrified at the thought of being demanded to prove our innocence, a devil's proof, my husband and I were on the verge of tears when a woman approached us. She stood between Dr. Mia and us, shielding us. Aren't you the head doctor here? I urgently need to talk to you. Upon seeing the woman, Dr. Mia turned deathly pale. She quickly put on a forced smile, approached buttering up the woman, who was glaring at her. Do you need something from my daughter? Daughter? The woman, glaring at Dr. Mia, was the head doctor of this hospital, and she was Yvonne, my mother. Yes, my mother, whom I was separated from as a child due to her divorce, was a doctor. After divorcing my father, she quickly rose through the ranks and has been the head of a major university hospital. She was also one of the people who agreed with revoking Dr. Mia's medical license when she found out about her misdeeds.
Oh, you're related. In that case, could you please just hear me out? I was only threatened by them and wrote the diagnosis reluctantly. As a mother, you wouldn't want your daughter to be a criminal, right? Can't you help me out?
Dr. Mia begged, trying to invoke my mother's sympathy right then and there, but my mother shook her head. My mother was like, don't mess with me. You and Sally have been deceiving the hospital and the authorities for 10 years, keeping my daughters confined at home. Sally kept them at home because she was afraid to be alone. You, on the other hand, funded your debts from your nightlife with Sally's disability benefits. You frauds. You need to face appropriate punishment and make amends. Dr. Mia's plea was abruptly dismissed.
No way, absolutely not.
Dr. Mia, realizing there was nothing she could do, slumped to the ground in despair. Whispers and stares from those around us focused on her, and we couldn't help but watch with indescribable feelings. Suddenly, a strong pull came from behind. I was startled and turned around to find, astonishingly, my mother-in-law standing firmly beside my father.
You! What have you done to Julie?
My father, shouting angrily at my mother.
Dad, why are you here? And why with my mother-in-law?
When I heard that Sally was looking for Julie, I wanted to help. You moved to a place without telling me. I thought I would meet you if I followed Dr. Mia. The reason I hadn't told my father our whereabouts was not just because of the family connection between my mother-in-law and him. Ever since my mother-in-law had a car accident, I had asked my father to look after her when I was out for work. It was during those times that they became close and started dating secretly, behind the backs of both of us. I had found out about this last year when I happened to see my father and my mother-in-law talking closely at my in-laws' house on a few occasions after returning from an outing. I suspected their relationship and hence didn't inform my father when we moved. The very sight of them together now sent shivers down my spine.
Give Julie back. I won't let you take her away. Julie, Mike, let's go home.
My father, yelling at my mother, had an intensity I'd never seen before.
Brushing off my father's grip, I was like, stop it. I know all the stories you told me about Mom are lies.
My father's face went pale at my shout. Turned out, since the divorce, he had been feeding me lies about my mother to make sure I didn't want to meet her. The stories about her treating him like a slave or leaving him for a younger man were all false. My mother, an accomplished doctor, always had a busy schedule. My father knew this when they married. But after I started daycare, his attitude shifted drastically. He blamed her for our lack of family vacations and decided to divorce her, claiming she wasn't a good mother. And my father suddenly took me and left home on my 4th birthday. In reality, it was my father who left, not my mother. Following the divorce settlement, even though my mother had a decent income, she couldn't guarantee time for raising me. So, my father was nominated to live with me. However, my mother had been sending a substantial amount in child support every month. I didn't know until I met my mother. Even after becoming a single parent, my father made sure I didn't want to see my mother by portraying her in a negative light with false stories. It seemed that my mother wanted to see me, but most of time she was overseas for trainings or researches. Even she kept sending me letters to me from overseas, but my father kept refusing, hiding the letters. There were times when it seemed they might meet, but something always came up. Either my mother got an emergency call at the hospital or my father would come up with an excuse to cancel at the last minute. I had been told since I was young that my mother couldn't be reached, or that no one knew where she was. Turned out, that was a lie. The reason my father could afford to travel once every 2 months and pay for my high school and college tuition was thanks to the child support money from my mother. Our comfortable life was all thanks to my mother. So, the story of my father working late nights was also a sham. To make it seem like he was struggling with parenting, he'd work a regular 9-to-5 job, then spend night in somewhere, coming home only in early morning. When my father yelled and he was like, "Where's your proof?" my mother calmly showed him a mobile bank app. She was like, "This is how much I've transferred to you over the years for Julie, and your company unusually has strict policies against second jobs, so it was impossible. I can confirm with them if you'd like." My father crumbled, and my mother-in-law tried to comfort him. Seeing my father like this made me realize that I had been lied to my entire life. While the truth was shocking, I felt more anger than anything else. I was like, "Thanks for everything, Dad. But it's time to say goodbye," saying that coldly. My father clung to me, and my mother-in-law was like, "Julie, your dad did everything he thought was best for you." No, he did it for himself. He lied about struggling as a single parent using the money from my mom. And you lied to my husband and me, trying to bind us to your home. Both of you are a perfect match for your lies. Please, stay away from us and my mother. With no excuses left, my father and my mother-in-law were speechless. Ignoring their stunned faces, we left the hospital with my mother. Later, Dr. Mia was arrested and lost her medical license. She had forged medical documents multiple times and was sentenced to imprisonment. Additionally, the hospital she worked for is suing her for defamation. My mother-in-law had bribed a doctor for a fake diagnosis, leading to her having to pay back all the pension money she received with interest. She's also facing fraud charges, as informed by the police. Mike says he's cut ties with her, so he's not bothered about her future. I'm trying not to care either. As for me, I realized I had been somewhat dependent on my mother-in-law. Feeling betrayed sent me into a mental spiral, so I've been seeing a therapist at the hospital where my mother works. Regarding my reunion with my mother, when I was getting a referral at my previous hospital, the doctor's name I was referred to was the same as my mother's. To my surprise, it was actually her. My mother was skeptical when she saw a patient named me, but during the consultation, she realized it was me. Our reunion can only be described as miraculous. I can't be treated by my mother due to hospital rules, but she supports me from behind the scenes. I've been back to my job at the office while still attending therapy. When visiting Dr. Ryan, who informed me of the truth about my mother-in-law, I heard that he and my husband were old high school buddies. We now often hang out, with Ryan visiting our place, and everything feels like old times. It may be hard for me to forget how I was tied up by my mother-in-law and my father. But my husband, my mother, and Dr. Ryan always encourage me to take things easy and do what I want. Thanks to that, I'm planning trips with my friends or going to cafes by myself. And then, finally, Bob said the worst possible thing. From next month, clear out your room. When my mother gets discharged from the hospital, I'm gonna bring her straight to this house. Living together might make household chores easier, but I'll have to face my mother-in-law and endure her snide comments every single day. I was utterly devastated. I understand. He seems hell-bent on making this happen with his mother. Rather than arguing with him, it's better to discreetly take measures. I've learned that from years of experience. Bob left, not suspecting a thing, and seemed quite pleased. Everything's going according to my plan. It's so simple it's laughable. A few hours later, after tidying up and taking a break, my phone rang loudly. It was a frantic call from Bob.
Hey, what the heck? The house is empty.
I am Catherine Rose, a 45-year-old working mother and hold a managerial position at a publishing company. I have a husband and 2 kids. A typical American family. When I got married, the idea of balancing work and family was just beginning to gain traction. It was an era when it was common for women to marry and become homemakers. Bob had allowed me to work. In return, I've given my all to both my job and household chores. After having kids, I've been fully committed to raising them as well. But lately, I've been feeling overwhelmed. My mother-in-law, Mary, who was initially against me working, has started to complain recently.
When are you gonna stop this job nonsense?
Leaving your husband like that, you're such a terrible wife.
Back in our day, the job came second, our main duty was to dedicate ourselves to our homes.
I've been working hard in both my career and home, raising the kids and managing household chores. I always thought of it as repaying the kindness Bob showed by supporting my career. Perhaps seeing my dedication, both my daughter and son help around the house. My daughter does the laundry and ironing, while my son takes care of the bath and fills the tub every day. When I come home, I just have to prepare the meal and clean up. I'm so grateful to my kids, but even though we're both working, Bob doesn't lift a finger. I've asked him to help out several times. But Bob's answer was always the same.
Catherine, I let you keep working, didn't I? You're trying to skip out on your wife duties and make me do the chores because you want to have an easy life?
Quit playing the victim. And every time, my mother-in-law would tattle on me, and I'd get an earful from her.
Bob's the breadwinner of the family, you know? And you're trying to make him do house chores?
What are you thinking, Mary?
This is why it's never good for a woman to work.
Be grateful I even let you work.
Understand your place.
Lately, perhaps she's bored, but almost every night she calls with these snide remarks. It's become so frequent and unbearable that both my kids and I are fed up. My kids have even started pretending they are needed somewhere else to hang up the phone. Sure, I'm grateful they let me continue working, but why all this hostility? I've been the one handling both the household chores and raising the kids. She should know how hard it is to juggle both roles. What more does she want from me? Right now, I'm under so much stress. The only saving grace is that my kids are on my side. The root cause of this is Bob's salary. Truth be told, Bob's pay isn't that great. It would probably be considered on the lower end. He had a tough time finding a job, and eventually landed one at a small company thanks to a family connection. If he'd shown some initiative, I wouldn't have cared about the low salary and would have supported him wholeheartedly. But Bob got down on himself because of the way he got the job. I should have been working at a bigger, more renowned company. In the beginning, he used to mutter things like this. He only ever did the work given to him, never striving for promotions or looking for new job opportunities. Someone truly capable would have studied on the side, or honed their skills to find better job opportunities. But Bob didn't, so he only ever got raises based on seniority. His performance-based bonuses were always the bare minimum. On the other hand, the company I work for is a nationwide corporation that had parental leave policies in place early on. It felt the effects of the economic bubble, but it's a reputable company that's managed to avoid major salary cuts. What's more, I've climbed up to the position of manager. I've successfully handled a significant number of contracts and projects. Naturally, I earn considerably more than Bob. I'm even covering our kids' expenses, using my paycheck to set aside money for their college funds. I've taken full advantage of the benefits of working for a large corporation. Looking back, I feel like I was living off my savings when I took parental leave for my 2 children and had no salary. With Bob's salary, there's no way he could cover all the living expenses with 2 kids. I don't recall ever receiving living expenses from Bob, and there's no record of any transfers. Maybe Bob let me continue working because he thought he could rely on my earnings. Lately, I've been thinking this a lot. Ever since we got married, I've started to wonder if we've mostly been living on my salary. To confirm this suspicion, I looked at my bank book. The rent, utilities, groceries, and the kids' school fees, I've been paying for all of it. There's not a single penny coming in from Bob's account. Eventually, I just laughed it off, feeling drained. Bob's salary is all gone, spent on his hobbies and giving pocket money to my mother-in-law. I've always thought that I owed Bob for letting me continue working. That's why I've been trying so hard with the household chores and childcare. But look at the situation now. I'm covering all the living expenses, while Bob spends his salary freely without saving a dime. When it comes to supporting our lives, wouldn't you say I'm the main breadwinner? Having me cover the living expenses while Bob does whatever he pleases, I'd say I've repaid the favor of letting me work. Yet, Bob's catchphrase is, "I'm the one supporting y'all. If you've got a problem, just leave." What's he thinking, claiming he's the one supporting us? Is he thinking he's covering the living expenses while freely spending his own salary? It's a total mystery, and I just can't understand. If I, who's paying for everything, were to leave with the kids, what would happen? Or if I threw this bank book at him and told him to leave, would Bob just quietly go? But, sticking to his claim that he's the main breadwinner, he'd probably tattle to my mother-in-law. I wonder if my mother-in-law knows about the difference in our salaries. No, if she knew, she probably wouldn't make those snide remarks. She must think he's a wonderful son, supporting his family and even allowing his wife to work. If she knew about the difference in our salaries, what would she think? Would she ditch Bob and cozy up to me? Nah, that's the last thing I'd want. If Bob and I were to part ways, I wonder what would become of him and my mother-in-law. What would they do? Tired of the snide remarks from my mother-in-law, I often find myself pondering these thoughts. Meanwhile, my mother-in-law had an accident at her home and hurt her foot. It seems she's gonna need hospitalization and physical therapy for a while. My father-in-law passed away before Bob and I got married, so my mother-in-law has been living alone. So either Bob or I have to take care of my mother-in-law.
Are you really gonna leave me all by myself when I'm in such a state? Come to the hospital ASAP. My foot hurts so bad I can't move, and I've got a ton of things I need done.
I quickly received a call from the hospitalized my mother-in-law. The moment I answered, she started with her demands, wanting this and that. I was at work, and whenever I tried to mention it, my mother-in-law would just lash out. I'm swamped with work, so I decided to let Bob handle her. Honestly, getting criticized by my mother-in-law for working is a huge stressor. Right now, it's best if Bob visits the hospital to cheer up my mother-in-law. When I asked Bob to care for my mother-in-law, he immediately began to complain. "Hey, Catherine, why aren't you looking after Mom? I'm working too, you know." Despite being his mother, he just tosses all the caregiving responsibilities to his wife. Wouldn't one think to at least visit her once or twice on their own? Holding back my frustration, I replied, "I have work too, Bob. Plus, all the chores at home. If you'd help around the house, maybe I could visit her. More importantly, I think your mom would be happier if it was you who came to care for her." This is true. Though some may vent their stress by snapping at their daughter-in-law, when one is immobile, it's better to think and talk positively. So, I kept finding reasons to avoid caring for my mother-in-law. Instead, I would neatly wash and fold my mother-in-law's laundry and pack it in a bag. If my mother-in-law asked for something specific, I'd buy it after checking the name of the products she requested. Even if Bob took credit for those things and I got the blame, I didn't mind. I just didn't want to hear my mother-in-law's snide remarks. Thankfully, it seems my judgment was right. My mother-in-law greets Bob with a big smile every day. Apparently, for a mother like my mother-in-law, nothing beats the joy of being cherished by her son. Having her beloved son around must feel much better than dealing with a daughter-in-law she'd want to make sarcastic comments about. Every day, it seems like she waits for Bob to come home from work. She must be really focused on chatting with Bob. She even hands Bob a shopping list note, and she hasn't called me since the first time she was admitted to the hospital. Seeing my mother-in-law's smiling, Bob probably feels he's being a good son. Even after he gets home, he's in a good mood. At night, when Bob returns, he simply hands me the laundry and shopping notes without any complaints. When handing over my mother-in-law's stuff, Bob throws in some sarcastic remarks at me, but still, I was able to live peacefully. Honestly, I just don't want to hear any of my mother-in-law's complaints right now. That's what I murmured to myself in the middle of the night. It'd be nice if things could stay peaceful for a while. But injuries take a toll at my mother-in-law's age. Through Bob, I was pushing hard for her rehab, but my mother-in-law, delighted with her son's visits, tended to skip it. As a result, by the time her injury healed, her legs had become weak. Bob would visit her in the evening after his work. Yet, my mother-in-law would skip her daytime rehab, just waiting in her room for Bob's visit. And after getting a taste of her son's care, my mother-in-law started making all sorts of requests from Bob. She rarely calls on me directly, but when it comes to things like laundry, I'm the one who actually does it. Running errands and doing laundry, even bringing her snacks, became a daily routine. All she did was sit in her hospital room and chat cheerfully with her son, while I did the housework. It was a relief not to see my mother-in-law, but I was worn out. My mother-in-law's requests were many and shopping alone was a significant chore. I get that hospitals can be boring, but why does she want so much stuff? If her legs have become weak, living alone surely becomes inconvenient. It seems my mother-in-law realized that too. Then, my mother-in-law made a shocking request to Bob. "My legs aren't moving well anymore. Shopping and preparing meals have become so difficult. Bob, please don't leave me alone." Of course, Bob sided with my mother-in-law. "Right, maybe we should live together. It might be easier for Catherine to take care of you." The two of them were moving in the direction of living together without consulting me. And then, Bob broke the worst news to me. "I'm gonna be living with my mother starting next month. Clear out your room. When she gets out of the hospital, I'll bring her straight here." From the perspective of efficiency in doing house chores, it's certainly easier for my mother-in-law to live with us. As for me, I'll have to see my mother-in-law every day and get nagged at each time. My feelings were extremely downcast. Bob acted like it was already a done deal that we'd all live together. "I understand," I replied, with little energy. Bob seemed determined to force this co-living situation, no matter the despair I felt. It might be better to secretly make plans rather than argue about it now. I knew this from years of experience. While Bob and my mother-in-law happily planned for the move, I constantly thought about how I could escape. I have my own room where I gather and review work materials. There are many books and files in that room. Whether you call it a study or an office, it's essential for me. Bob wants me to give it up. Without this room, my work would be impacted. I might have to come home even later than I do now. I muttered to myself while staring at the bookshelf. Where should I move all these books and documents? I can't leave them at home if we live with my mother-in-law. They're too important to risk getting thrown away or damaged. It may sound like something out of a TV drama, but I really fear she might throw them out. Especially since she'll probably target what she knows is important to me. And if I dare complain, she'll feign ignorance and run to Bob for support. She didn't know they were important, Bob. Catherine's mad even though it was an accident. Help! There'll be no peace for me in this house once we start living together. I can see her bossing me around and making snide remarks about my work, wearing me out. What should I do? If my mother-in-law is coming to this house. I had a sudden realization. Why hadn't I thought of this simple solution before? It seems living with my mother-in-law and all her nagging wore me down more than I realized. It felt like the fog before my eyes was gradually clearing up.
Well, of course, there's absolutely no need for me to hold back. Why didn't I realize something so simple?
I mumbled to myself and immediately began making preparations. And as the month changed, the day of my mother-in-law's discharge from the hospital arrived. Bob was all excited, having taken the day off from the start of the morning. Hey, you better take proper care of my mom from now on. Don't think I'm gonna step in like I did when she was in the hospital, he said in a commanding tone. Without responding to Bob's order, I changed the subject.
Oh, speaking of which, here. Your mom's been in the hospital for quite a while, right? Hospital food is bland, and they don't give you much. I bet a gourmet like her wasn't satisfied. I think the discharge process and packing will take up the morning, so why don't you take her out for some good food? You took the day off after all. How about a nice drive, just the two of you? I think she'd really appreciate it.
I handed Bob a generous amount of cash. I'd set aside some money for living expenses and even Bob's personal spending, but this was more than his monthly allowance. Surprised by the unexpected bonus, Bob's spirits lifted even higher.
Well, aren't you thoughtful? All right, I'll use this money and go for a drive with my mom. I'll give you a call when we decide about dinner. Make sure the house is in tip-top shape for my mom, all right?
Without a hint of suspicion, Bob happily left. Everything was going just as I had planned. It was almost too simple, I couldn't help but laugh. This should buy me some time. I'm looking forward to when Bob and my mother-in-law return. With that, I continued tidying up the house. I had to finish cleaning before Bob and my mother-in-law came back. A few hours later, just as I was taking a break after finishing up, my cell phone began ringing loudly. The call came in a flustered tone from Bob.
Hey, what's going on? The house is empty.
That's right, after Bob went to pick up my mother-in-law, I moved all our stuff to the new house we just rented. Of course, I left some of Bob's personal belongings and a bed for my mother-in-law in the room. Oh, you're back already? You told me to clear out the room, so I emptied both the room and the living room for Mom to feel comfortable. From now on, please enjoy your time with her. I responded nonchalantly, which only infuriated Bob.
You've got to be kidding me. The living room and kitchen are totally empty. After all I've done to support this family, how could you?
There it was, his go-to line. He seemed to believe that saying this put him in a superior position. How naive.
No, Bob, I've been the one supporting the family. Including you. Weren't you spending your paycheck on pocket money for your mom and your own hobbies? And yet, you'd demand an allowance from the family budget. How does that make you the breadwinner?
Bob seemed surprised by my resistance, but he retorted nonetheless. His argument, however, was nonsensical.
Shut it! I'm the man here. I'm the head of this household. You, as my wife, should just do as I say. Now, put everything back the way it was.
No thanks, I bought all the furniture in the living room and all the kitchenware with my salary. The kids are with me, so don't worry. I also paid for the rent, utilities, and groceries of that house. So, in reality, I'm the breadwinner. Why did you decide to live with your mom without consulting me? I can't live with someone so selfish. As you wished, you can be the main provider now. Live your life as you please. It seemed that Bob finally realized my intentions.
Hold on, are you saying the rent for this place?
I've paid up until the end of this month. But from next month, you'll need to handle it. I've also canceled all the automatic payments for electricity, gas, and the internet, so good luck with that. Bob's words probably tipped her off to the situation. My mother-in-law also started making a racket in a loud voice.
How could you do this, Catherine? Just because you have a job doesn't mean you can act all high and mighty. Fine, Bob and I will live here in luxury.
Oh, does my mother-in-law not know about Bob's earnings? I hope you can have that luxurious life. That is, if your son can afford it. Anyway, goodbye.
Wait, Catherine, where are you right now?
I didn't bother listening to the rest of Bob's rant. I hung up and blocked both Bob and my mother-in-law's numbers. The rest is probably as you'd imagine. With the meager salary from his uninspiring job at a small company, Bob was left with very little after paying the rent and utilities. Living in a needlessly spacious apartment, where a family of 4 once lived, Bob and my mother-in-law would constantly bicker. What's with this meal? Can't you provide something better for your mother?
Shut up. If you want something else, make it yourself. You're just making excuses, saying walking is too hard after slacking off on your rehab. You don't do anything at home, Mom. You're just wasting time.
Having neglected her rehab, my mother-in-law's legs had become weak, and she refused to do any home workouts. Could my legs not move as I wanted, causing my frustration? She started imposing unreasonable demands on Bob, whom she had cherished so much. Maybe she's showing early signs of Alzheimer's. Even adding my mother-in-law's pension, it feels like they're living in poverty. They'd be better off if they moved to a smaller place fit for 2, but it seems Bob hasn't thought of that. He probably tried to contact me numerous times, but I've blocked all communication from both Bob and my mother-in-law since that incident. Of course, my kids did the same, blocking their numbers when we moved. Bob doesn't know our new address, and he can't ask for help. Their living situation will probably collapse soon. I was earning a decent income with the help of my children, so I managed to lease a nice apartment. Each of my kids has their own room. I secured a spacious room that doubles as a bedroom and workspace. The rent might be a tad high, but with Bob out of the picture, I'm saving more than enough. My kids, who were tired of being belittled by their father, are now living freely. They've become more helpful around the house. Helping out without being criticized by their father makes chores feel good, they say. Everywhere, isn't it normal to praise and thank kids when they help? I'm glad my children haven't become bitter. I was headed back to the apartment where my kids awaited. Later, through a lawyer, I served Bob with divorce papers. I lived on my salary, while he spent all his earnings solely on himself and my mother-in-law. That's a valid reason for divorce in my book. Bob tried to argue against the divorce with various points, but my lawyer cut him off every time. The fact he claimed to be the breadwinner but didn't contribute was labeled as verbal abuse and clear financial abuse. If it went to court, Bob wouldn't stand a chance. I got custody of the kids, naturally. In exchange for not seeking alimony and child support, we agreed on no property division. After all, the savings we had for the kids' college were from my earnings. I couldn't let Bob and my mother-in-law take that. The car was in my name, and our house was rented. I'm grateful we didn't buy a house. Now, I can focus on my job without complaints. I want to support my kids in whatever they want to do. With the money saved for college and my future earnings, I should be able to cover their tuition.
All right, I'm gonna work hard today.
I once almost died, but I was able to recover and I feel like I've been reborn. I'm ready to start my life over, but I can't be bothered to take care of an old woman. Although my husband was able to recover from his illness because I became a donor. He never expressed any gratitude. In fact, he handed me a business card of a divorce lawyer. Although I felt frustrated and anxious, I wasn't shocked. Ever since he regained his mobility, he had been out and about, which had already made me suspicious. And now, I am the one who is sick. I have been diagnosed with stomach cancer. Fortunately, it is not advanced, but I will have to start treatment with surgery and chemotherapy. I am filled with anxiety and I can't believe he is abandoning me like this. All my love and trust for my husband has vanished in an instant. The hardest part is that, for our daughter, Kate, he is undoubtedly her only father. I feel guilty about her becoming fatherless, but with my upcoming battle against the disease, I don't have the energy to try to repair our relationship. A month later, I received a series of aggressive calls from my husband, which I ignored. Eventually, he showed up at my hospital room and dropped a bombshell. My name is Christy Young, a 29-year-old housewife. I have been married to Mike, who is a year older than me, for 7 years, and we have a lovely 5-year-old daughter, Kate. I used to work full-time as a regular employee even after we got married, but I quit when I went on maternity leave. I really wanted to take it slow and raise Kate, but due to the economic downturn, we couldn't afford to live on my husband's salary alone. So, as soon as Kate was able to go to daycare, I started working again. I got a job at an apparel company where my sister-in-law, Lisa, is the president. They were looking for an office worker, and since I had similar experience from my previous job, they hired me right away. Although I am a relative, I was not pampered, but the atmosphere in the office was good, and there were many senior mothers, so it was easy to consult about childcare and take leaves for sudden fevers of my child. I am really grateful that I was introduced to such a good workplace. However, it was extremely tough to juggle work, housework, and childcare. In the morning, I prepared breakfast for my husband and Kate, made my husband's lunchbox, sent him off, took Kate to daycare, and went to work. After work, I picked up Kate, went shopping, came home, cleaned, bathed Kate, and prepared dinner. By the time I finished preparing Kate's meal, my husband came home, so I prepared his dinner, and while he was eating, I put Kate to bed. Although my days were hectic, my husband was not very cooperative with housework or childcare. Even if Kate had a fever in the morning and I was busy taking care of her, he would still say, "Where's my breakfast?" without any concern. When I asked him to do the grocery shopping because I had to work late, he complained, "I am tired from work." I was tired from work too, but I didn't have the energy to argue, so I ended up doing everything by myself. Our lives took a sudden turn. When my husband was advised to have a detailed examination after his company health check showed some bad results. My husband didn't want to get retested because he said he didn't feel any pain and was fine, but he started to feel a little uncomfortable in his daily life, with unexplained bruises all over his body, bleeding gums just from brushing his teeth. It would be terrible if he ignored it and it turned out to be a serious illness. We have to think about Kate's future, so I asked him to get a thorough checkup, and it turned out he had leukemia.
Why me?
He was shocked to hear a familiar disease name. However, leukemia is not incurable nowadays. There are many cases of remission and social reintegration through chemotherapy and bone marrow transplantation. I decided to support my husband, who was on the verge of despair and self-destruction, and accompany him through the treatment. He took a leave of absence from work and was admitted to the hospital immediately. As for me, I had to manage work, housework, childcare, and supporting my husband's treatment. I reached my limit before my husband did. The stress of hospitalization made him lash out at me more than before, which was one of the reasons. I knew it was misplaced anger, but I was honestly exhausted from going to work, taking care of Kate, doing housework, and visiting the hospital in my spare time. That's when Lisa, my sister-in-law, reached out to me. "Why don't you live with me? I can help with the housework and taking care of Kate." She was the president of a company, and I knew from working at the same place that she was always on the front lines of sales. She made a point of picking up feedback from the field rather than leaving everything to her subordinates, which made it easier for the staff to exchange opinions. So, I knew how busy she was. "I really can't impose on you. You're busy too. If you collapse now, Kate will be the one who suffers the most, right? I will support Mike as much as I can. You should rely on those who can help you now," Lisa said firmly, and I couldn't hold back my tears. I was worried about Mike, Kate's future, and my own health. I was really grateful for Lisa's presence, and her encouraging words saved me. Mike's parents had already passed away, and Lisa was living alone in her parents' house. I've always thought it was too big for one person. I didn't want to sell it because it has memories of my parents, but I'm glad you two can come. She warmly welcomed me and Kate. Living with Lisa was very comfortable. We had always gotten along well, and it felt like I had gained a real sister. Lisa, who had been living alone for a long time, was good at housework. She actively helped out, which made my life much easier than before. At that time, there was hope for my husband's treatment. I was found to be a compatible donor for his bone marrow transplant. As soon as Mike was diagnosed with leukemia, Lisa and I underwent testing to be bone marrow donors. The probability of finding a compatible donor is 1 in 4 among siblings, and it is said to be 1 in several hundred to several tens of thousands among unrelated people. We were devastated when we heard that Lisa's bone marrow was not compatible, but when we found out that I could be a donor for Mike, he was overjoyed. To provide bone marrow as a donor, I had to be hospitalized for several days. During that time, I had to take time off work and couldn't take care of Kate. It was a burden on Lisa, but she didn't show any signs of annoyance. "Thank you so much for doing this for my brother. I will do everything I can to support you, so don't worry about anything. Just take care of yourself now." Encouraged by Lisa, I underwent bone marrow extraction surgery for my husband. After the surgery, Mike had to spend some time in a sterile room, being careful of infections while resting. I was discharged from the hospital after a few days and, thanks to my sister-in-law's kindness, took an additional 2 or 3 days off work before returning. The hematopoietic stem cells transplanted into Mike seemed to be working properly, and after a few weeks, he was able to move to a general ward. When I took our daughter, Kate, to visit Mike in the general ward, there was a nurse in the room. Seeing Kate after a long time, Mike smiled happily. "Mr. Young is recovering well. He is still young and strong, so if he continues to make good progress, I think he can return to work soon. Thank you very much, as always." The nurse smiled and left the room. As she said, Mike's condition stabilized, and he was able to be discharged a few months later. Although he still needed to rest at home, the 4 of us, including Lisa, started living together in the in-laws' house. I had to take on all the responsibilities of work, housework, childcare, and taking care of Mike again, but it was less burdensome thanks to Lisa living with us. Moreover, Lisa is the type of person who can speak her mind clearly to Mike. "You don't have to push yourself too hard, but you should practice doing some housework as part of your rehabilitation." Hearing this, Mike reluctantly started helping with the chores. However, since he was still recovering, I often ended up helping him, and eventually, he stopped doing even the things he could do, knowing that I would come to help if he dawdled. I still feel sluggish. Using that as an excuse, he wouldn't even try to get up from the sofa. When the doorbell rang while I was preparing dinner, and I asked him to answer it because I couldn't leave what I was doing, he sighed heavily and complained. "They told me to rest, and you're being demanding." I couldn't help but think that it was not too much to ask, but only Mike knew the extent of his pain. So, I believed him and made an effort to move myself, even if it was a bit of a strain. Perhaps because I overexerted myself again, my health started to deteriorate. It became harder to eat, and Lisa started worrying that I might have lost weight. By this time, Mike had almost fully recovered and had returned to work. Even though I no longer had to take care of Mike, the household chores and childcare didn't decrease. Even when I was not feeling well, Mike, who had regained his energy, started going out alone more often on his days off. He didn't seem to notice that I was unwell and didn't offer to help with the chores. When I asked him where he was going and with whom, he got angry and said,
"I have a private life too."
Eventually, the stress caused my stomach to ache continuously, and Lisa suggested I get a full medical checkup. Since Mike had been seriously ill, I thought it would be better to address any issues early for Kate's sake. As a result, this time I was diagnosed with stomach cancer. Fortunately, the progression seemed to be slow, but still, hospitalization and painful chemotherapy were necessary. At the sudden news of my hospitalization, Kate seemed anxious, but her father was out for the day, and he couldn't comfort her. Instead, my sister-in-law, Lisa, stayed with Kate. To avoid disturbing me while I prepared for the hospital, Lisa took Kate out shopping. While I was silently preparing, my husband, Mike, came home.
"What's going on? Are you going on a trip or something?"
I yelled at Mike's carefree demeanor.
"I have stomach cancer."
Stomach cancer.
"I've been feeling sick lately, so I went for a checkup today. That's the diagnosis. I need to be hospitalized."
Hospitalized.
"What about the house during that time? Are you leaving it to my sister?"
I was shocked that the first thing he worried about after hearing about my hospitalization was not concern for me. Granted, it's not a matter of life and death because the progression is slow. But still, facing his wife who is about to undergo painful chemotherapy, the first thing he asks about is the house, which I found utterly disappointing.
"Well, this is just perfect."
Huh? Divorce me.
"What?"
I was confused and bewildered by the sudden request. I had always supported him devotedly when he was ill. Now that I'm the one who's ill, he turns his back on me.
"Having nearly died once and being able to recover, I feel reborn. I want to start over, and I don't want to take care of an old woman."
Despite my being the donor that allowed Mike to recover, not once did he express gratitude. In fact, he handed me a business card of a divorce lawyer.
"You don't even wear makeup at home. I can't see you as a woman anymore." "Even if you say that, I'm busy with work, housework, and childcare. I don't have time for makeup." "That's just an excuse. On top of that, you have cancer now. I can't deal with that."
I was bewildered by Mike's angry demands to sign the papers quickly. I was already anxious about the cancer diagnosis. However, despite my frustration and anxiety, I wasn't shocked. Ever since he regained his mobility, Mike had been out and about, and I had been feeling suspicious since then. With this illness, all my love and trust for him vanished. What pained me was that for Kate, he was undeniably her only father. I felt guilty about making her a child of a single parent, but with the battle against cancer ahead, I didn't have the energy to repair my relationship with Mike. Humph. Now we are just strangers. Mike smiled satisfactorily.
"Hey, is it over?"
Don't just come in like that.
"But you're taking too long."
Suddenly, an unfamiliar young woman appeared at the entrance. She wore flashy makeup and was dressed in a stylish dress, a beautiful woman. But on closer inspection, her face was familiar.
"Are you the nurse from the hospital where Mike was admitted?"
It was hard to tell at first glance because she was in plain clothes, but she was the nurse assigned to my husband's room at some point. Apparently, she seems to have been his mistress.
"Yes, she is.
She supported me devotedly when I was sick."
"Much more than you ever did."
I was dumbfounded by Mike's boastful statement. Supporting a patient devotedly is a fundamental part of a nurse's job. It's frustrating to be compared to her in that regard.
"Get out of this house right now. This is my family home, after all."
And then he said that assertively. Indeed, this is my husband's family home, but it is now under the name of my sister-in-law, Lisa. However, if I divorce Mike, Lisa and I will become strangers. More than parting with Mike, it's sad to be separated from Lisa, who is kind, reliable, and has a good relationship with my daughter, Kate. But there's nothing I can do about it. I packed my suitcase with just the essentials, in addition to preparing for my hospitalization. I no longer have any love for my husband, and I want to get out of this situation as soon as possible. While I was silently preparing, Lisa and Kate, who had gone shopping, came back. "We're home. Oh, do we have a guest?" Lisa seemed surprised to see an unfamiliar woman, and Kate, clinging to Lisa, seemed to not understand the situation. So, I clearly stated, "I am going to divorce Mike." "What?" Lisa looked as shocked as I felt. Then, as if realizing something, she handed Kate some snacks she had just bought and told her to eat them in the next room. With only adults left, Lisa immediately glared at my husband.
"What are you thinking?"
Mike recoiled for a moment when Lisa, not me, confronted him.
"He's going to divorce me and start a new life with that woman over there. Since you and I will become strangers, he told me to leave."
Lisa's eyes widened in disbelief at my words.
"Christy is having a tough time, and you? How selfish can you be? You're the one who should leave. Never show your face to me again."
Lisa firmly told off Mike, who clicked his tongue, snorted, and left the house. The woman glanced down at me, smirked triumphantly, and followed Mike.
"Christy, I'm really sorry."
After the two left, Lisa looked at me apologetically. I felt guilty for making her, who had done nothing wrong, feel that way.
"Please don't make that face. You've done so much for me, Lisa, and I can't thank you enough."
And I felt a bit relieved that Lisa had decisively cut off Mike. "Even if you divorce Mike, I'll always be on your side, Christy." We had already vacated the house we lived in before Mike fell ill. Having been kicked out by Lisa, Mike now had no place to live, but he probably planned to move in with that woman. Although he had insurance and subsidies, Mike shouldn't have much savings left after his major illness. Well, it's none of my business anymore since we'll be strangers. Although we were no longer a married couple, Lisa is still helping me. I have to be hospitalized, and I was thinking of leaving Kate with my parents, but I was wondering what to do about transferring her kindergarten when Lisa said, "I'll take care of her." I know Kate will be anxious without her mom, and changing environments will make her even more anxious. "My work is stable right now," Lisa said, so I decided to rely on her. About a month after I was hospitalized, I received a call on my smartphone. The name displayed was my ex-husband, Mike, and of course, I ignored the call. Despite ignoring it repeatedly, I kept getting calls from Mike. When I mentioned this to Lisa, who came to visit me, she said she also received calls and ignored them, but he apparently showed up at her in-laws' house. He apparently insisted on seeing me, but she sent him away, saying it was impossible since I was in the hospital. Don't pay attention if he says anything. It's too late for him to realize your worth now. Lisa's words made me feel stronger. After saying goodbye to Lisa, saying, "I am going home for today," Mike appeared in my hospital room.
"Why are you here?"
I hadn't told Mike which hospital I was admitted to. He didn't even ask.
"I went to my parents' house today. I saw my sister leaving with flowers, so I thought she might be visiting you."
Apparently, he followed Lisa. Mike's persistence was terrifying, and I was puzzled about what he wanted. Then, he clung to me. "My illness has recurred." It turns out, Mike's leukemia had recurred. Although remission is possible with a bone marrow transplant, it does not guarantee there will be no recurrence. "So, can you be a donor again?" I was dumbfounded by his audacity. I was battling a severe illness, cancer, and the ex-husband who abandoned me came back as soon as he fell ill again. It was all too convenient.
"I don't care. Isn't it your own fault?"
"What do you mean?"
"Didn't you have someone who supported you more devotedly than I did?"
Upon hearing my words, Mike looked regretful. It seems that as soon as she found out about Mike's recurrence, his girlfriend immediately broke up with him. She apparently said she could handle work but not taking care of a sick person in her personal life. "You're the only one I can rely on now," I firmly told Mike, who was begging for my help. "I absolutely don't want to. Are you going to abandon me when I am sick?"
You were the one who abandoned me first, right?
Mike was at a loss for words at my response. "Besides, I am currently consulting a lawyer about you."
A lawyer?
"Yes, of course. Child support for Kate. I will make sure you pay." "But I am sick." "I am telling you, I am too." As our fruitless argument continued, a doctor who noticed the commotion came into the room. The doctor restrained Mike, who was trying to grab me, and took him away. It seems that Mike was later handed over to the police. After being interrogated, a restraining order was issued against him. Hearing the commotion, Lisa came back to my room. After hearing the details, she seemed utterly disgusted by Mike's selfishness. I asked Lisa to testify, and after consulting with my lawyer, I decided to claim compensation from Mike and his mistress. Mike was very reluctant, but his mistress agreed to pay immediately, as if it were a severance payment. Since then, I have been slowly recovering. Lisa has been supporting me devotedly, and although Kate is still young, she has been cheering me on without being selfish. The cancer was successfully removed, and no metastasis has been found. On one hand, Mike still hasn't found a donor and is apparently living in fear every day. He managed to pay me the compensation by depleting his savings, but it seems that he won't be able to afford Kate's child support. Since he can't pay child support, he is not allowed to visit, so he is seemingly fighting his illness alone. I still have a good relationship with Lisa. After I was discharged from the hospital, I thought I couldn't bother her anymore, so I was considering moving out with Kate, but she got mad at me, saying I shouldn't think about unnecessary things after recovering from an illness. She told me to spend freely until I saved enough money, and I took advantage of her kindness and lived with her for a while with 3 of us. Since Kate is very attached to Lisa, we eventually decided to rent an apartment nearby even after saving enough money. We go back and forth between each other's houses, and now we have a relationship like best friends. I had a terrible breakup with Mike, and I was struck by an illness and had a hard time, but there are still people like Lisa who have supported me without changing. I may make Kate feel lonely, but I hope she grows up to be a strong, kind, and just woman like Lisa, and I want to continue to get along well in the future. In a note written in my husband's handwriting, it said he'd be on a business trip for a month. Seeing it, I was certain our marriage was over. It was that night, alone in a room with no one around, lost in thought. What's happening now? In the dead of night while my husband was away, I suddenly heard the cry of a baby. I rushed to the front door and found a letter. And it read, "I can't raise him." To my astonishment, there was a baby inside a cardboard box along with the letter.
Why is there a baby here?
It was a situation I had only seen on TV shows. My mind raced, unsure of what to do, and the next thing I knew, I was calling my husband.
"Don't bother me when I'm busy. You're getting in the way."
My husband snapped at me for calling. But when I told him about the baby, he responded with startling words.
"We're gonna raise this child. Got it?"
With that, he hung up. His words lingered in my mind. There was definitely something going on. Well, I've got my own suspicions. At this point, 1 or 2 more problems don't matter. I'll find out everything and drag you down. My name is Jessica. I'm a 40-year-old housewife. I used to work for a major corporation, but I resigned when I married my husband, Mike. I met Mike about 5 years ago. Back then, he came to the company I worked for as a salesman. He was cheerful and a bit of a joker. I wondered then if he was cut out for sales. But when it came to work, he spoke seriously and clearly, surprising all the coworkers. I still remember how he left such an impression on me. A month later, while taking a break on a park bench near the office, a man in a suit approached and asked, "Is this seat taken?" Feeling annoyed, I didn't look at the man's face and just said, "Sure," intending to leave the spot. But then the man hurriedly stopped me.
"Hey there, Ms. Johnson. How've you been?"
Wondering how he knew my last name, I looked at him.
"Oh? Mr. Smith? Good to see you. Thanks for the other day."
"Thank you."
"Thanks to you, Mr. Johnson, everything at work went smoothly. I really appreciate it."
Mike, who I hadn't seen in a while, was just as playful as before, chatting up a storm with me. I naturally talked to him about work and everyday life. From then on, whenever I took a break, Mike was always there beside me. Although it was just for a short time, I cherished the moments spent with Mike, and soon found myself wanting to be with him all the time. Turns out, Mike felt the same way. How about a real date? Not just a 1-hour break, but a genuine date. Yes. That was the turning point for us. We became a couple, and a year later, we got married. And this year, we celebrated our 4th wedding anniversary.
Jessica, thanks for being with me all these years.
Same goes for you.
Thanks for always cherishing me.
Celebrating our wedding anniversary together. I was overwhelmed with emotion, feeling so fortunate to have married Mike, and tears welled up.
Jessica, it's become a yearly tradition for you to cry, huh?
Shush.
They're happy tears, okay? Give me a break. I get it.
This happiness will last forever. Back then, that's what I believed. But as our 5th anniversary approached, I realized that had been just an illusion. For the past 6 months, Mike's been coming home late. He used to always come home right on time, but now he's usually home after 8 p.m.
Honey, how much longer are these late nights gonna last? It's been half a year. This never used to happen. Doesn't it seem strange? Business hasn't been great. At this rate, our bonuses are gonna get cut. Everyone's working their tails off.
Under normal circumstances, I would have believed him, but something felt off to me. My husband's company, although considered a small to medium-sized business, is quite well known around here. Their revenues have been increasing year after year, and they're always hiring new employees. Can a company like that suddenly experience a drop in sales? Having employees work overtime for half a year because of tight sales is simply not normal. I don't want to doubt my husband's words, but there's this nagging feeling deep down. Oh, by the way, I'm gonna head out for a bit.
Huh?
You just got home. I'm just meeting someone I know, that's okay, right? Considering he's been working late recently, I figured it wouldn't hurt to let him go once in a while.
Just don't be out too late, okay?
You've got work tomorrow.
Thanks. I'll be back soon.
Mike quickly changed into his casual clothes and with a big grin, left to meet his friend. That night, Mike didn't return home until past midnight.
Oh, sorry, did I wake you?
You're okay? That's pretty late. We just got caught up chatting, and it got late.
I see.
I'm sleepy, so I'm gonna head to bed. Good night. The next morning, when I woke up, Mike, who usually sleeps beside me, was nowhere to be found. Rubbing my sleepy eyes and looking around, he was still missing. Checking my phone, it was just past 5 a.m., even before my alarm. Mike? I called out, but there was no answer from him. I wondered where he went and headed to the living room, only to find Mike sound asleep on the couch. Why are you sleeping here? I tried to wake him up to get him to bed, but Mike didn't budge. And then something fell from his hand to my feet. Is that his phone? I picked up the dropped phone intending to place it on the table. That's when I noticed the image of a woman's back on the phone's screen. Who is this? A celebrity? I guess it's fine. I put my phone on the table. Can't get back to sleep now. Maybe I should take a walk. I left my husband sleeping on the couch and decided to go for a walk. Stepping outside, the warm sunlight and a refreshing breeze greeted me.
Ah, this feels so good.
Morning walks on a sunny day are the best. It's a great way to start the day. After about an hour, I came back home. When I entered the living room, I found my husband looking sternly at my phone. "Good morning." "Why the long face? Want something to drink?" "No thanks." Usually, he'd reply with a smile, but today he seemed off. Maybe he's just groggy from sleep? But then, his next words made me realize it was something different.
"Hey, can you not talk to me so much in the morning?"
"Huh? It's just, you're kind of annoying." I was taken aback. He'd never spoken to me like that before. Without another word, he went to our bedroom, changed into his suit, and left for work without breakfast. Without our usual morning hug. While I was doing housework, puzzled by my husband's strange behavior this morning, my cell phone rang from an unknown caller. Normally, I wouldn't answer calls from unknown numbers, but for some reason, I picked up this time. "Hello? Hi, is this Jessica?" "Yes, who's this?"
"It's been a while. It's Sarah. Sarah Lewis. Remember we worked together a while back?"
Lewis. Sarah Lewis. Then it hit me. 12 years ago, right after graduating from college, I worked at a convenience store for a short time. Back then, Sarah Lewis, who was still in high school, worked there too. Why on earth was she calling me now? And how did she get my cell number? "It's been ages, Sarah. I never expected a call from you." "It's quite a surprise." "I never thought I'd call you either, Jessica. If it weren't for that crazy coincidence, I wouldn't have. But I thought, why not give it a shot?" She was always like this. She probably doesn't mean any harm, but there's always something about Sarah that gets under my skin. That's just so typical of her. "So, what's this big coincidence? You're not gonna believe this. I work at the same company as Mike. Your husband, Mike." "Really?" "When I heard from Mike that his wife's name was Jessica, I wondered if it was you. And it turned out I was right. When I told Mike we used to work together, he gave me your number." It was indeed a crazy coincidence that the girl I worked with back then was now working with my husband. But at the same time, I felt a bit betrayed that Mike gave her my number without asking me first. "I'm glad you called, but aren't you working right now? Is it okay to be on the phone?"
"Obviously, it's not, but now that I've heard your voice, I should get back to work. Talk to you later. Bye."
She's still as lively as ever. I never thought I'd hear her voice again after 15 years. It made me a little nostalgic, thinking about the old times. It's been 15 years since then. And later that night. "I'm home." "Welcome back. You must be tired. The bath is ready, so you can hop in." "Wait, what?" From behind my husband, a woman suddenly appeared and greeted, "Good evening." A colleague from work?"
"It's me. Sarah."
Unbelievably, my husband had come home with Sarah, who had called earlier that day. Both of them held large shopping bags in their hands.
"Hold on a minute. I wasn't told you'd be coming over."
When Sarah called earlier, she said she'd catch up later. You should have figured she'd come today. As a wife, you should know these things. I was slightly infuriated by my husband's irrational comment, but held my tongue since we had a guest. I wonder if they're that close, calling Sarah with such a friendly nickname? Hee hee. I caught a brief chuckle from her. What was that? While I was distracted, the two had moved into the living room. I let out a sigh and followed, only to find them laying out a bunch of alcohol and snacks from their bags on the table. What do you think you're doing?
"We're gonna have some drinks here. Mike said we should drink at home, so I bought a bunch."
That's not enough, make us something.
"I wasn't expecting this. I only made dinner for the two of us."
With that, Mike gave me a cold look and said, "Then go buy something now." What's with that attitude?
"Excuse me? You have a problem when I'm the one feeding you?"
His chilly gaze was now replaced with a commanding tone. This was nothing like the Mike I knew, and as I tried to hide my shock, she gave me a sly smile. Even in my own home, what is this overwhelming feeling of alienation? Unable to bear being there any longer, I immediately headed out to do some shopping.
What the hell?
Although worried someone might hear, I couldn't stop muttering to myself. This continued even as I shopped at the grocery store. This should be enough. An hour later, I returned to the apartment after finishing my shopping. Standing at the front door, I took a deep breath and opened it, only to find an eerie silence enveloping the place. Hello? There was no sound of their voices. I gently opened the living room door and saw the two of them, snuggled up on the couch, asleep like a couple. I stood there, frozen, unable to process what was happening right before my eyes. And from that day on, Sarah's visits to our home became frequent. She'd come over with Mike, and they'd casually start their evening drinks as if it was second nature. Hey, get us something to eat. I'd love a steak, please. Come on now. If you heard her, hurry up and get it. It felt as though I had been relegated to a mere housemaid, taken for granted. Mike doted on Sarah, and it was evident he hardly had me in his thoughts anymore. On her part, Sarah often threw condescending remarks my way, making me feel utterly humiliated. I'd never felt so low. My feelings towards the two of them were nothing but negative. Ever since Sarah started calling, I felt like I had been living in a never-ending nightmare. I bore the brunt of their taunts and verbal abuse. I often found myself wanting to escape this toxic environment. 6 months after Sarah started visiting, she suddenly stopped showing up. Around the same time, Mike began coming home even later. One morning, I woke up and noticed Mike wasn't in bed. I headed to the living room and found a note on the table. In Mike's handwriting, it simply read, "Gonna be on a business trip for a month." Seeing that, I was certain. I realized our marriage was over. One night, as I sat alone in the empty room lost in thought. What was that? In the middle of the night, while Mike was away, I suddenly heard the cries of a baby. I rushed to the front door and found a letter. It read, "I can't raise this child." Incredibly, inside the cardboard box was a baby, along with a letter.
Why is there a baby?
It was a situation I had only ever seen on TV shows, but now it was happening to me. My mind raced in panic, unsure of what to do, and before I knew it, I was calling my husband.
Don't bother me when I'm busy. You're disturbing me.
He was furious that I had called. But when I told him about the baby, he replied with shocking words.
We're gonna raise that child. Got it?
And with that, he hung up. His words lingered in my mind. Something was definitely up. But I had my own plans. I didn't care if 1 or 2 more troubles came up now. So, I'll uncover everything and bring you down to rock bottom. After that, I quickly grabbed some things and left the apartment. 2 hours by car. It's been a long time since I've been back. Even outside the apartment, there was a place for me to go.
Welcome home.
Mom, I'm back. I had already informed my mother that I would be returning. At the same time, I had asked her for a favor. Mom, about that favor I asked. I've made the contacts, Jessica. Now, all you need to do is act. Though I had come back to my parents' house thinking of resting and healing from everything, there was no time for that. My husband, Mike, would be back from his business trip in a month. I had things that needed to be done by then. One day, as I was cleaning the room, Mike called. Hello?
Hey! Where the heck are you right now?
My husband was immediately aggressive on the phone.
You call out of the blue? What on earth could someone on a business trip possibly want? I don't give a darn about that. Where are you?
I came back early. It's amazing you still have a job. Normally, you'd be the first on the layoff list.
Shut it. Just tell me where you are.
No matter what I said, Mike insisted on knowing my location, making it impossible to have a conversation. I'm at my parents' house.
The kid's there with you, right?
Yes, sleeping soundly in the back room. Come back with the child right now. Got it? Get back here immediately. His behavior was so different from before, it reminded me of the man he once was. You've changed a lot. You weren't like this before.
People change, Jessica. Anyway, don't forget what I just told you. Understand?
With that, Mike hung up. It's absurd. But if he hasn't mentioned that thing, does that mean he hasn't noticed it? If he returned to the apartment, he'd definitely see it. If that's the case, it makes sense. It became clear that Mike wasn't at the apartment. Not wanting to waste this opportunity, I drove straight there. Upon arriving, I grabbed that from the table and immediately headed to a specific location. 20 minutes later, I arrived at a single-family apartment complex. You live in a pretty nice place. There was a familiar compact car parked in front of the apartment. Just as I thought. A familiar compact car. It's Mike's car. And the fact that it's parked here is proof that my husband must be here. What could be so important that he'd cut his business trip short to be here? At that moment. Then it happened. From inside the house, I heard a woman's scream. And right after that, a man's furious shout echoed. This might be bad. I quickly pulled out my cell from my bag and called someone. However, throughout that time, cries from the woman and shouts from the man continued to emanate from the house. Just when I was getting really worried, a car pulled up behind me. Oh. I rang the doorbell, but no one answered. On a whim, I tried the doorknob and to my surprise, it was unlocked. I cautiously opened the door and called out, but there was no response. From deeper within the house, a voice cried out for help. Rushing to the room from where the voice came, I found a man menacingly approaching Sarah with a look of fury on his face. Why are you here? What are you doing? You shouldn't be threatening a woman like this, especially as an adult. Shut up. Stay out of it. This is between me and her. A problem, huh? I couldn't help but think, isn't the problem yourself, in my mind? Jessica! Please help me! He suddenly attacked me. All right. I can see what's happening, so you don't have to spell it out for me. What? You just told him not to treat women like this. And now you're being so dismissive of me? Can't you see I'm in distress? That's because I get it, okay? Just be quiet for a second. I've got things to handle. While Sarah was complaining about something, I had more pressing matters to attend to. I have more important things to deal with than that. I stepped outside the house for a moment and headed towards a car parked outside. I called out, "Excuse me," and from inside the car, a well-built man stepped out. And with that man, I headed back to the room where the two were. Who's this old man? Why's he here? Upon seeing the new arrival, both of them froze. Allow me to introduce you. This is Sarah's father, Mr. Carter. What? Seeing Sarah's father, Mike instantly distanced himself from Sarah, a complete change from his previous demeanor. On the other hand, Sarah's face turned pale as a ghost at the sight of her father and she froze, looking down. Nice to meet you. I'm Carter, Sarah's father. Jessica called me over. What the heck is going on here? Sarah, what's your relationship with this man? The two clearly looked intimidated by Carter's imposing tone and demeanor. He's my husband. What? So, you're telling me you were having an affair with my daughter? Well, that's one way to put it. At that moment, Carter's face turned fierce, glaring at Mike with piercing eyes. Mike looked like a deer caught in headlights, completely frozen. Soon, Carter's face was inches away from Mike's. Mike looked utterly clueless about what to do next. You made your bed, now lie in it. It wasn't clear if it was these words that broke Mike's spirit, but he collapsed on the spot. From her bag, I took out a paper and placed it in front of Mike. I think you'll understand when you see it, it's a divorce paper. My name's already on it. You just need to sign. She also placed a pen next to it. Defeated, Mike signed the divorce paper without resistance. Thanks. As for alimony, my lawyer will be in touch later. We'll discuss the details then. Mike silently nodded. But this incident wasn't over. Standing nearby was the very man who had ruined Jessica's life. "You're truly despicable. You played with my feelings, always threatening to leave. And this is how you end things?" Jessica spat these words out at her ex-husband. But, to her surprise, he responded with newfound vigor.
"You say I played with you? Don't kid yourself. You were the one who approached me first. Saying you had feelings for me. Saying you wanted to be with me. If it wasn't for you, my life wouldn't have turned out this way. What the heck? Anyone who'd take that seriously is the fool. First off, thinking you're some big catch is your first mistake. Because of you, my life's a complete mess. Being seen by my dad in a place like this is just the worst." "Huh? What's that supposed to mean? If anyone's the worst here, it's you. I turned you down, but you kept saying you wanted our baby. And when the baby came, you said it wasn't what you intended, that you didn't expect to really have a child. That you wanted to live your life and wanted a break, but you didn't want the responsibility of the child. So, leave it to me, right? You're way more to be blamed. I didn't say all that."
This is going nowhere, and listening to this nonsense is just a waste of time. Okay, stop. I've heard enough from both of you, just cut it out. You're making everyone irritated. The two looked over, panting, as if wanting to say something. I could tell they wanted to say something, but probably seeing Carter standing next to me, they seemed too scared to utter a word. I get it, if you have a big, intimidating guy like that staring you down, you'd be too scared to say anything. Then Carter suddenly asked Sarah. "What's going on with this story? Are you pregnant with his child?"
"Oh, no, Dad, it's not like that. I didn't want this, but he was so pushy."
Darn it. I completely forgot to mention that Sarah was pregnant.
"What? Why are you blaming me? You were the one who came on to me. It's not true. I didn't do anything. How can a baby come if you didn't do anything?"
Adding fuel to the fire. You.
"That's right. If you hadn't done anything, none of this would have happened. I probably shouldn't have invited him in the first place." "Hey, hold on."
She added more. "I thought we were pretty much done, but since we're here, I'll give you this." I casually tossed several photos onto the table. Those pictures undeniably proved their affair. These are pictures capturing the two of you in the act. It was a real hassle getting these. While you were on your business trip, I had the divorce papers drawn up and hired a detective. All this in such a short time, you know? Why would you go through all that trouble? Well, I had to. I can draw up the divorce papers myself, but to catch you two cheating, I needed a pro. It did cost me a pretty penny, but thanks to that, I got the evidence. I'm just presenting it a bit late, but you have to really take in the fact that you cheated, right? The sight of the incriminating photos completely deflated the two. Just as they thought it was over. You two better be ready for what's coming. What? Dad. Carter only found out about Sarah and Mike's affair moments ago. And it was only from words. Upon seeing the photos, he realized that they really were having an affair. "Sarah, I'm taking you straight home. We'll decide what to do next once we're there. And Mike, you'll have to pay Jessica alimony, right? You need the money ASAP, don't you? I know a place where you can make good money." Upon hearing this, both were trembling in fear. Days later, both of them resigned from their jobs. The reason was that news of their affair had spread throughout the office, making it uncomfortable for them to stay. Later, as Carter told it, Sarah tried to go back to her parents' home and hoped they would forgive her. However, their anger didn't subside, and she was kicked out along with her baby. Now, she's living in a rundown apartment, working day and night to support her child. As for her ex-husband, he's working at a high-paying job Carter recommended to cover the alimony and child support. Apparently, it's a job at sea, and once he leaves, he can't return for several months. Well, after such a betrayal, it's only fitting. As for me, I stayed at my parents' home. My mother helps with the housework, and I have found a new job and made some new friends. Life feels more fulfilling now. My parents often ask when I'll marry again, but I think I'll wait for a while. Maybe when I meet the right person, I'll think about it. For now, I want to enjoy this life.
My wife will be gone by tomorrow.
During our honeymoon, I woke up in the middle of the night to overhear my husband secretly having a terrifying conversation on the phone. Trembling with fear, I dared to peek into his smartphone to find out what he was talking about. What I found was beyond belief. Knowing of my husband's plan, I took his passport and flew back to the States on my own. As I was planning to utterly destroy him, someone suddenly approached me. My name is Karen. I'm just an ordinary office worker in New York. I met my husband, Brian, through mutual friends. We hit it off after a few dinners out, and after dating for a year, we just recently got married. Brian is handsome and has a really kind personality, but there was one major problem. This happened one day just before our wedding. I'm home. Normally, Brian gets home from work later than I do, but on this day, I had to work late, so I got home after him. As I walked in and was about to take off my shoes, I noticed something odd.
Were these shoes always here?
There were not only Brian's work shoes, but also a pair of women's heels. Could he be cheating? I thought. Listening carefully, I could hear muffled voices. It was a man and a woman talking, and I immediately recognized Brian's voice. I couldn't make out the entire conversation, but I could hear a woman's voice laughing along. In the spur of the moment, I started recording with my smartphone and burst into the living room.
Huh?
There was Brian and my mother-in-law.
Oh, welcome back. Karen, welcome home. Sorry for intruding.
Relieved that it wasn't an affair, the living room scene was still quite bizarre. Boxes were piled up everywhere. Confused, I asked, "What's with all these boxes?" Brian responded, "Oh, these? We're moving." My mom came over to help pack. I was so confused I felt like my brain might explode.
Moving? Where to? I never heard about this. Oh, Brian. You didn't tell Karen? Sorry, I've been so busy with work. I'm so sorry, Karen. I told him if you're gonna get married, you should move into our house. It looks like Brian didn't mention it to you.
Live in her house? I was more confused than ever. I was looking forward to starting our newlywed life together, just the two of us. This is a huge deal. I have to put a stop to this. So, I said, I haven't been told anything about this. I can't just agree to something decided without me. But then they said, it's normal for newlyweds to live with their in-laws, you know? If you can't, maybe you should reconsider the marriage. Mom's right. Plus, I'm used to my house. It'll be easier for you too if anything happens. Two birds with one stone, right? With my mother-in-law present, I couldn't argue with Brian, and it was decided that we'd move into his parents' home. Turns out, Brian is very much a mama's boy. In retrospect, had I been more assertive back then, maybe things wouldn't have turned out this way. Living with my in-laws was incredibly tough for me. Ever since we started living at my husband's parents' house, his mama's boy tendencies accelerated. The first person he'd ask for anything was always Mom. While my mother-in-law took care of most of the cooking and household chores, the rare times I made dinner he would say, "My mom's cooking tastes better." Perhaps my mother-in-law enjoyed being relied on by her son because she did everything for him. My father-in-law would just turn a blind eye to this behavior and not only ignored me but wouldn't even look at me. Sometimes, when I tried talking to him, he'd just brush me off. I constantly questioned my place in the household. The biggest concern for me was my mother-in-law's extravagant spending habits. After moving in, I realized she adored branded clothes and bags. Every time her favorite brands released something new, she'd buy it. Every release, she'd approach me saying, "Karen, I really want this, but I'm a bit short on cash right now. Could you maybe lend me a little?" Even though I thought she shouldn't buy it if she couldn't afford it, since she did all the cooking and cleaning, I couldn't object and just gave her the money as asked. Thanks to this, the savings I had accumulated since my college days were nearly gone. When I tried discussing this with my husband, he just said, "We're living here rent-free, so don't complain. It's not like I chose to live here." Still, the reason I didn't leave was that my husband, for all his faults, genuinely cared for me. Whenever we both had a day off, he'd take me out on dates and he had even planned our honeymoon. Living with the in-laws was tough, but I kept going, holding on to the hope in his kindness. Finally, the day of our honeymoon that my husband planned arrived. Our destination was Italy. It was a dream come true for me as I always wanted to try authentic Italian cuisine. The thought of traveling abroad with the love of my life made me so excited. However, my excitement for the honeymoon turned into a nightmare due to one thing my husband said. It happened late at night. I woke up wanting to go to the bathroom and noticed my husband wasn't next to me. Assuming he was also in the restroom, I approached and heard him speaking on the phone. Who could he be talking to at this hour? Listening closer, I heard some shocking words.
"My wife's gonna be gone tomorrow."
What?
"Don't worry, Mom. I've got it all planned. I'll get back to you."
It seemed he was talking to my mother-in-law. But what did he mean by "gonna be gone"? Fearful, I quickly returned to bed and pretended to be asleep. After a while, my husband came back to bed and soon began snoring. Making sure he was asleep, I stealthily took his smartphone and headed to the bathroom. Luckily, he didn't have a password on it. As wrong as it felt, given the circumstances, I had to look. Opening his messages, I found a terrifying plan detailed in the chats with his mother. They were scheming to take my life for the insurance money, which my mother-in-law intended to spend on branded items. The fear was overwhelming. I couldn't believe that my husband, who had always been kind to me, was plotting this with his mother. I took photos of their conversation with my own phone and returned to bed. The rest of the night, I was too frightened to sleep. As dawn broke and transport services started operating, I realized I needed to leave for my safety. Gathering only my belongings, I decided to leave the hotel on my own. Just as I was about to leave, I spotted my husband's passport on the desk. A good idea just hit me. I took my husband Brian's passport and left the room, in an attempt to strand him abroad. I then headed to the airport, boarded the plane, and returned to New York ahead of him. Throughout that time, Brian kept calling me relentlessly, but I ignored all his calls. Once back in New York, I began preparing to take revenge on my husband and his mother. Since I was living with his parents, I couldn't return home. So, I based myself in a relatively cheap hotel in the city, gathering more evidence and contacting lawyers. I also made occasional visits to our house when his parents were out, sneaking out some of my belongings bit by bit. Brian continued to reach out, but I kept ignoring him. A few days of such life passed, and I was at his parents' house fetching my belongings. His mother, Karen, was at her knitting class, and his father was out golfing. I figured they wouldn't be back for at least 2 hours. As I was packing, I suddenly heard, "Huh? Karen?" I turned around to find my father-in-law standing there. This wasn't good. Brian and I were supposed to be on our honeymoon in Italy until today. "What are you doing here? Weren't you two supposed to be on your honeymoon?" What should I do? What excuse could I possibly give? Should I be honest about why I returned to New York alone? But what if my father-in-law was in on whatever scheme Brian was planning? These thoughts raced in my mind. Seeing my confusion, he said, "It might be better to talk over a coffee. How about we go to a nearby diner?" Not wanting to be there when my mother-in-law returns, I agreed to his suggestion. Once we sat at the diner, he quickly asked, "So, why are you here when you should be abroad? What happened to Brian?" I was hesitant to tell the truth. If he was in on the plan with her and Brian, everything I had worked on would be ruined. "Didn't your wife tell you anything?" I asked, trying to gauge his knowledge. Looking puzzled, he responded, I haven't heard a thing. His reaction suggested that he genuinely didn't know anything. Believing him, I decided to lay out everything to him.
Are you aware of this plan?
I then showed him the printed messages exchanged between Brian and my mother-in-law. His face was one of sheer shock.
No way! I've seen them whispering together a few times, but I never thought they were plotting something like this.
It seemed like my father-in-law really didn't know.
Yes, when I was over there, I overheard my husband talking on the phone with his mom, and that's when I found out. I got scared, so I returned to the US on my own earlier. I'm so sorry. My wife really owes you an apology.
Please don't apologize.
You haven't done anything wrong. As for the future, I feel terrible asking this of you, but I'm thinking of divorcing Brian.
That's completely up to you, Karen.
I'm truly sorry, especially since this should have been a happy time as newlyweds.
He apologized to me many times. I used to think he was avoiding me, maybe even disliked me, but he spoke to me with such kindness and concern. Despite him being such a good man, I can't fathom how his wife and my husband turned out the way they did. While I was thinking about this, he shared a story with me.
Karen, you've been forced to buy branded items for my wife, haven't you?
Well, yeah, I have.
You know, it might have been my fault.
Excuse me?
Well, it was shortly after my wife and I got married. I gifted her a designer handbag for her birthday. After that, she became totally obsessed with designer brands. Even at this age, she keeps wearing those expensive brands. I kinda wish she'd dress more age-appropriately.
I see.
There were times when she'd even go into debt just to buy them. I was pretty mad at her then. I never imagined she'd ask you to buy stuff for her now. I'm really sorry about that.
I had no idea that my mother-in-law's obsession with brands had such a backstory. Still, I couldn't forgive her for what she'd done.
It's not your fault. She continued her habits even after you got mad at her. She's the one to blame.
Right.
By the way, how's Brian doing? He was supposed to be back by now, wasn't he?
About that. Oh no. I wondered how he'd react knowing that his son was stuck overseas. But I had come this far, I had to tell him everything.
Actually, I took Brian's passport with me when I came back to the States. So, he won't be coming back for a while.
What?
I'm sorry. I know it's wrong, but it was the only way to smoothly proceed with the divorce.
I see. Well, since you live with us, I guess it's understandable. So, that's what was going on.
Did something happen?
No, just remembered the day you returned to the US. I overheard Brian talking to my wife on the phone.
According to the father-in-law, Brian, for a moment, seemed panicked without me, but he later said that things would work out if I just disappeared. At the time, he had no idea what they were talking about, but now it made sense to him.
I understand the situation. If you're okay with it, I'll support you, Karen.
Really?
Thank you so much.
While we were talking, my phone suddenly rang. It was from Brian. Given the time, he probably realized his passport was missing. I finally answered the call.
Hello?
Oh! Karen! Thank God you answered. Where the heck are you? I've been worried sick. But I'm just glad you're safe.
I'm sorry for making you worry. I had an urgent call from my family back home and had to return. Things got so hectic that I couldn't get in touch.
I get it. But hey, have you seen my passport? I was gonna return today, but I can't find it.
About that, I accidentally took your passport with me when I rushed back.
What? So what am I supposed to do?
You should be able to get a replacement passport there. It'll probably be faster than me sending it to you.
A replacement? What about my job? I can't take any more days off.
Don't worry, I'll explain everything to your company. I'll also talk to your parents about it. All right then.
I'm sorry. So, that's what's going on. Please be careful when you come back.
With that, I hung up the phone.
Karen, you sure can spin a tall tale, can't ya? I've always been crafty, that's for sure.
Thanks to my father-in-law supporting me, I was able to proceed with the divorce preparations more smoothly. And finally, the day arrived. Brian managed to get his passport reissued and returned to the States. His mom went to the airport to pick him up, so the two of them came back home together.
We're home. Man, what an ordeal. Indeed. All because of Karen.
After hearing from Brian that I'd returned to the States before him, his mother, apparently upset that their plan failed, started making sarcastic comments towards me. I wanted to snap back at her, but I held my tongue. No worries. They're gonna get what's coming to them soon. As soon as Brian and his mother entered the house, my father-in-law, with a stern look, said, "Both of you, come here." He led them to the living room where I was waiting.
Sit down.
Brian and his mother seemed a bit flustered, but they couldn't defy his imposing demeanor, so they sat down obediently.
I apologize for bringing this up as soon as you guys got back, but there's something really important we need to discuss. Important? I'll cut to the chase. Brian, I want a divorce. Divorce? Hold on, Karen. What's this all about? You trap my son in Italy and then demand a divorce when he comes back? There's a limit to being unreasonable. Unreasonable? Aren't you the unreasonable ones here? What do you mean? Oh, so you're playing dumb now? Can you explain this then?
Saying this, I showed them pictures of the messages exchanged between Brian and his mother.
What's this? These can be easily fabricated these days. This isn't valid proof. You're right. This might be weak as evidence. But what about this?
I then presented a voice recorder. Pressing the play button, the recording of a phone conversation between Brian and his mother played. My father-in-law had recorded it for me. Since his wife is hard of hearing, she always turns the speaker volume to the max during calls, making it audible throughout the house. My father-in-law took the opportunity to record them. The conversation revealed that since I had safely returned to the US, their scheme had failed. It also included the disappointed voice of my mother-in-law and my husband discussing their next move.
You can't deny this now, can you? Wait, Karen. Please reconsider the divorce. I only did what my mom told me to. I never wanted any of this. But she kept saying she needed more money to buy her favorite designer items. I just wanted to see her happy. But now, I see the light. I don't want to divorce you. Let's leave right now and live happily. It's not too late, right?
I was utterly dumbfounded by his words. How on earth could he come up with such a delusional fantasy in his head?
You know, I've always thought this, but you really need to stop with the whole mommy thing. It's super creepy. I get that you want to please her, but trying to get rid of your wife and using the insurance money to buy her fancy stuff? No way I'm staying with someone like that. Just the thought gives me a headache.
Brian looked utterly defeated by my words.
In any case, I will definitely be seeking a divorce. Plus, I will also ask for reimbursement for all the designer items you bought with my money. What? But then I won't be able to buy designer items.
Even after all this, she still seems obsessed with designer brands. I'm truly dumbfounded by this mother and son duo.
Enough is enough.
Suddenly, my father-in-law interjected.
All you care about is yourselves. Do you realize how terrified Karen has been because of your actions? Are designer items really worth it to you, even if it means using someone else's money? Do you realize how much trouble you've caused her?
The two of them were taken aback by his outburst. Thanks to him speaking up for me, I felt a bit relieved. But my revenge wasn't over yet.
Wait a sec. When did you find out about this? On the first night of our honeymoon in Italy. I overheard you talking to your mom in the middle of the night. So, that's why you flew back to New York the next morning. You didn't tell my company about this, did you? You're finally catching on? Well, you'll know the answer to that soon enough.
Just as I said that, Brian's phone started ringing at the perfect timing.
It's from the company. You gotta be kidding me.
Hesitantly, Brian answered.
Hello? What? Fired? No, wait. It's all a misunderstanding.
Before he could explain, the call seemed to have been cut off.
Just so you know, I've already provided evidence of this to your company.
Having lost both his wife and job, Brian seemed drained of energy and slumped to the floor.
So, from now on, let's communicate through my lawyer. And stay out of my life, okay?
And just like that, our newlywed life came to an end. The story didn't stop with the divorce. My lawyer, whom I'd been consulting with, told me that even just plotting to kill someone was a crime, so I reported the matter to the police. While they weren't arrested, both of them had to pay a hefty fine. Thanks to having a criminal record, Brian struggled to find a new job, and Karen became the talk of the town. Moreover, to pay for the damages and alimony, almost all of the designer goods Karen had hoarded were sold off. The only thing left was a purse, a birthday gift from her husband. From now on, the household finances will be managed by her husband, and Karen's pocket money would be reduced. Seems like they got a taste of their own medicine. As for me, I'm living alone in a condo in Manhattan. While I did divorce shortly after getting married, I didn't feel lonely at all. Rather, I felt liberated. If possible, I'd never want to live with someone else again. Sure, living alone has its challenges, but not having to constantly be wary of someone else is more than worth it. And no more dealing with Karen's money grubbing. I've started saving bit by bit, hoping that someday, I'd find happiness with someone else.